Modern America is the most powerful country in human history. The US has over 800 military bases and spends 37% of the world's military budget. It's the leader of a vast, interconnected global system that's helped drive unprecedented prosperity and reduce conflicts. To understand America's role in the world and why it's so crucial globally, you have to go back to the country's founding. In its first 70 years, the US wasn't a global power by any stretch. It mainly expanded across two regions, eventually controlling much of North America, pushing all the way to the Pacific in a wave of expansionism that led to the slaughter of indigenous peoples living on the continent. But early America was deeply divided over whether the country should expand beyond the Pacific and Atlantic. After the Civil War, this became a major debate. Some leaders, like Secretary of State Seward, wanted America to step onto the global stage as a world power. Seward pushed successfully to buy Alaska from Russia, but his attempts to buy Greenland, Iceland, and Caribbean territories were blocked by Congress. That was because many Americans, including a lot of people in Congress, were strongly anti-imperialist. They worried that getting more involved in global politics would mean having to integrate inferior populations, and this opposition put serious brakes on imperialistic ambitions. But something happened in the late 19th century that shifted the whole debate about American expansionism. The Industrial Revolution sparked explosive economic growth, and the booming U.S. economy needed a more centralized government and bureaucracy to manage it all. Power shifted to the federal government, making it easier for expansionist presidents like William McKinley to push American influence abroad on their own. A major turning point came in 1898 when President McKinley dragged the country into war with Spain over Cuba, despite strong opposition. The rising U.S. easily crushed the dying Spanish Empire, taking over Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines in the process. In the next couple of years, the U.S. annexed the Kingdom of Hawaii, 1898, Wake Island, 1899, and American Samoa, 1900. A few years later, America took control of the Panama Canal Zone, 1903, sent troops to occupy the Dominican Republic, 1916, and bought the U.S. Virgin Islands, 1917. This rapid expansion made the U.S. a true global power on the map. During this time, the U.S. also started backing pro-American regimes in places like Nicaragua to protect its growing business and military interests overseas. It played a key role in international diplomacy regarding Western influence in China. World War I showed just how much U.S. influence had grown. America's involvement wasn't just crucial in ending the war, but President Wilson also took part in the Paris Peace Conference that wrapped things up and attempted to shape the post-war world. They set up peace terms. He was the first to become America's most ambitious figure in foreign policy, pushing for an international organization called the League of Nations, aimed at promoting global peace and cooperation. The League represented a worldwide political effort, showing just how ambitious American foreign policy had become. However, isolationism was still a major force in the U.S. Congress blocked America from joining Wilson's League of Nations project. During the Great Depression and Hitler's rise, America focused more on its own region than on European affairs. But eventually, the U.S. grew too involved abroad to stay completely unaffected by global events. In East Asia, Japan's growing empire directly threatened American property and troops, bringing the U.S. and Japan into conflict. This ultimately led to the attack on Pearl Harbor and America's entry into World War II, when II would forever change America's global role. The U.S. was the only major power to avoid economic destruction during the war and the only country equipped with atomic weapons. Because of this, it was in a unique position to set peace terms, and with the goal of preventing another war, it took the lead. The most famous example was the creation of the United Nations. The UN Charter established an international legal system banning wars of conquest, like those started by the Nazis in Japan. It also served as an international forum where countries could air grievances and help resolve disputes. In this way, Americans hoped that great powers could compromise and settle their differences peacefully. Peace through law, not war. The United Nations is the most famous post-war organization, but it's not the only one. Around 730 representatives from all 44 allied countries gathered in a small vacation spot in New Hampshire. Their goal? To build a global financial system that could prevent another Great Depression and World War. The agreement they came up with was called the Bretton Woods Agreement, which ended up becoming the backbone of the global financial system and led to the creation of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. By setting up these institutions under the UN, countries committed to working more closely on global issues. But the problem was the world's second biggest power, the Soviet Union, saw things differently. World War II had united the Allies, Democratic West and Communist East, against Hitler, but that alliance wasn't going to last. The US saw Soviet expansion into Eastern Europe and beyond as a direct threat to its vision of a free trade world. To a large extent, in one form or another, socialism was spreading its shadow over most countries on Earth, and that shadow was creeping into their own freedoms. Worried about Soviet intentions toward the West, Europe, the US, and other European nations created NATO, a military alliance meant to stop Russia from invading other European countries. Globally, the US committed to a strategy called containment, named because it aimed to stop communism from spreading worldwide. This new global struggle meant the US had to exert its influence everywhere. Time. Instead of dismantling the massive military machine built for World War II, its wheels kept turning most of the time. This led to two main outcomes. First, the US formed unlikely alliances with countries like Saudi Arabia, Israel, and South Korea, seeing them as strongholds against communism influencing their regions. Second, the US often began intervening covertly in dozens of countries to contain Soviet influence. Sometimes this meant supporting sympathetic groups. Other times, like in Iran in 1979 or Nicaragua in 1985, it meant backing dictators by providing weapons and money to rebels. During the Cold War, the US intervened in hundreds of conflicts worldwide, creating a complicated web of alliances, tensions, and relationships everywhere on Earth. After the Berlin Wall fell, the US could have pulled out of this system, cut ties with allies, and scaled back its military. But even though the US cut some military spending, most Cold War infrastructure and alliances stayed in place. Presidents George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton decided that as the world's only superpower, the US had to keep actively managing global affairs.
We should be and we must be peacemakers.
NATO, originally created as a counter to the Soviets, stayed intact and even expanded, serving as a way to keep European countries united without the Soviet threat. Washington's support for countries like Israel and Japan remained solid on the surface. As a way to prevent wars in these regions, global alliances and institutional systems were created to keep peace during the Cold War. War became a permanent concern, and so did the military and political commitments needed from Americans to keep these systems running. This system is still in place today, and no American politician since the Cold War has seriously pushed to dismantle it, except Donald Trump. Trump had mixed feelings about these commitments. He felt that American allies weren't paying their fair share for protection and questioned the value of free trade. This put NATO and even the World Trade Organization under scrutiny.
At some point, we have to say, you know what, we're better off if Japan protects itself against this maniac in North Korea. We're better off, frankly, if South Korea is going to start to protect itself.
Saudi Arabia?
Saudi Arabia, absolutely.
This goes against the consensus that's dominated U.S. foreign policy since 1945, which was more internationalist compared to the isolationism before that. So, will President Trump follow through on some of these ideas and upend decades of institution building and alliance values? We'll find out soon enough. Out soon.